So thank you everyone for tuning in to yet another episode in which I talk about issues related to public transport. Thanks for joining us, Bird. I know that you were excited about this specific topic. The topic being how trains are portrayed in popular media. Now, owing to my own consumption, no problem, okay. So, owing to my consumption habits, it's going to be tilted towards science fiction and fantasy, but if people mention something to me in chat that I can actually look at without breaking the stream, I will look at it. And we're going to start with a television show from 21 years ago that it remains iconic to millennial nerds. Despite a lot of problematic things about it that people did not maybe notice at the time, but in many ways that show has not held up very well, I don't think, and that show is called Firefly. So Firefly, for people who don't know, is the space western. So the backstory developed over a single season, followed by a film. It was not a commercial success, so they didn't make more of that. They made comic books. Some of the actors and the characters were iconic enough that the actors would be then hired by video game developers to play characters in video games that were not even the same IP, not the same intellectual properties, but characters that had the kind of similar personality, which not too surprising for the actors have ranges. So it's a spaceship with a crew of 9. They're essentially space pirates. The captain, Malcolm Reynolds, fought in something called the Unification War, where in the new solar system that they are all in, the outer planets rebelled, kind of an X before the Civil War, but they kind of brush over the issue of slavery. As I said, the show has not, I don't think, held up very well. Malcolm Reynolds and his trusting number 2, who had fought under him in the war, Zoe, got a spaceship where they're just going to do, where essentially they do smuggling. But imagine Han Solo with a TV series. Like, imagine a TV series about Han Solo, but instead of just him and Chewbacca, the crew is 9 people. So first episode introduces the crew. Introduces the other characters on the ship. Were very Western trope. Like, for example, one of them is the sex worker with a heart of gold. Another is the preacher with a troubled past. There's the muscle guy who's played by Adam Baldwin. Yeah, they don't rob other ships in transit. I don't think that's ever seen as a thing. But yeah, they land on planets and do robbery there, which I would call space piracy. But yeah. So the second episode is called The Train Job. So first episode introduces everyone. The second episode is kind of like, it's an episode that was the second episode to have been made. The Train Job was the first to have been aired because Fox did not like the actual pilot, so they kind of made it as a second pilot to kind of very briefly introduce things like there's the Unification War, the Confederates lost, there's a bunch of carpetbaggers who are complete morons. And our heroes are just taking the jobs that they can, which may or may not be legal. This one is not. This is a train robbery. Now, of course, they also filmed it all in California, so all of the planets look like Southern California. And I'm not gonna. So this is so if you want to see what it is, and then you can, this is like a much longer review of this specific episode. I am not going to actually play the entire thing. I haven't even seen the entire thing. I was looking for a good freeze frame of this episode, and this is a good one. So, this is the train. So this is a train that is hovering over this what looks like a maglev track. I think this is more separation between the train and the track than there should be, but that's not really the point. So it's kind of it hovers, and Firefly, while otherwise trying to be very gritty and naturalistic, does have the science fiction trope of the cars fly. They have a like in the film, for example, Serenity. There's an entire sequence which is a chase on essentially a car chase, but flying car chase, if you will. And so respecting the genre, we're seeing that the train flies. It's also a single track. And I'm going to see if I can very briefly see if there are things. So this is the captain. This is two, and they're on a train, and the train is full of soldiers. They're trying to steal. They're not trying to rob to hold up the train. They're trying to steal things from the train. So for them, it's like extra bonus points that they're stealing things while the soldiers are not noticing. I'm gonna see if I can get to the goods, and if I can't, I'm just gonna. No, I can't. Okay. So the train. I showed you like one brief bit where maybe you saw what the interior looked like, but it was essentially what you would expect a train to see in a Western. And then they go to a car that just has a bunch of cargo on it, kind of like a baggage car, not secured or anything. Again, the sort of thing that you would expect from a kind of very old-timey train on a single track, except that this, respecting the genre, would be hovering. So, to be clear, this is like complete garbage for how you would portray train. So the train as portrayed, yeah, I can actually see a society that got to the point that it would be cheaper to just go straight to maglev and not build normal trains. But why would you build it single track? The transport economies there always didn't make sense because like the spaceship, for example, like the presence of spaceships makes ground transportation look very different, unless you're making sure that space travel is very expensive, which it does not look very expensive on the show. Like it's something that it's viewed like riding on like flying on an airplane, and owning a spaceship is viewed as like owning a fishing boat. But that's an entirely different thing about science fiction. I'm gonna talk specifically about the trains here. I don't know. I mean, I could see trains, but why would? But again, they probably would be more modern in the sense that there would be two tracks. The passengers would not have. I mean, when you have a baggage car, what you're saying is you're paying people to handle the baggage. And I guess you can say that if the wages are really low. But first of all, we're not seeing a baggage handler. But but more importantly, it's not even like riding Amtrak. It's like what people who ride Amtrak think rail travel was in the golden age, which again, that's the aesthetic they're going for. I'm not gonna. I mean, again, as I said, I don't think Firefly has held up in the last 21 years, but that's not because of how it's portraying the trains. It's pointing out that the trains here are kind of a tool to portray a certain Wild West aesthetic. Even when it does get to be a little weird, in the sense that, for example, in the sense that It's not that it's 2003 science fiction budget. Like, I'm not. I mean, the budget is not why the maglev is single track. The budget is not why there's a separate baggage car. And uh, the and that aesthetic is something that, again, it's an aesthetic people get as part of the Western genre, to the point that how much would it cost to whom? Would it cost to Fox and Joss Whedon? Nothing. Like, I mean, it's not like they actually built a maglev. Like, it's paying an artist. No, the baggage car. They could. Oh, because of how they shot it. I mean, right. So my assertion is that a society that has maglev trains would probably not have baggage cars. It would have. I mean, people would just bring their own. Would just carry their own. Especially with like more modern views of crime, just because usually if you're worried about crime, and if it's a society where there are train robberies, you are worried about crime, you would want your bags in front of you where you can see them. My understanding is that historic train robberies were not stealing the baggage when nobody was noticing. Maybe they were, but at least the ones that are most culturally iconic involved an actual holdup. So again, I'm not complaining about the aesthetic. I'm complaining that it's kind of how people view I'm complaining about why this is the aesthetic. So it's kind of it's a very Wild West thing. And this is something that we constantly see in things that try to imitate Firefly, and also things that try to imitate the Western genre, or are in the Western genre. So remember how a couple months ago I streamed myself playing StarCraft 1? StarCraft 1 is very gritty, used future science fiction from the late 90s. The first game was released in 98, the expansion in 99, but it was not space western. It was in no way or shape or form space western. For example, the humans, the Terrans, have southern accents usually. You're getting the vibe that they were going for was white trash, complete with the oppressive government literally being called the Confederacy and having Confederate flags. Not even because they were, not even because they had any history of that, just because that's the oppressive government. I mean, yes, you can. This is not. I mean, Firefly. Let's not pretend that Firefly actually has a class critique that way. I have an entirely separate rant about science fiction and class, which I think I posted on Twitter many years ago. If I ever am tempted to vlog on about trains, I will talk about how things that are said to be working class are actually about small business. Like owning a spaceship should not be viewed as like owning a fishing boat. It should be viewed like owning a private jet. The Expanse, which otherwise is good at class critiques, makes the same mistake. No, definitely not Whedon, but I mean, my point is that like even The Expanse, which is much better at this, screws this particular part up about spaceship. The Expanse. I mean, if people want, we can talk about the portrayal of rapid transit in The Expanse, which, as far as I can tell, is actually pretty good. It's not detailed or anything. But The Expanse is also not at all a space western, except for book/season 4, which I think is the weakest. I don't know if the weakest in the entire series, but certainly weakest in the first 6. Books 7 through 9, I think, are weaker. But yeah. So so we have the space western. Is my point, and I was talking about StarCraft because StarCraft 2 was released in 2010. It went through a decade of development now. And in between, a lot of things happened, and one of them was Firefly. And StarCraft 2 was very clearly influenced by Firefly. Like, they made Jim Raynor much more like Malcolm Reynolds than in the original game in Bird War. And so there was much more Wild West vibe to it than, I guess, Southern. And one of the things that they did is one of the missions that you have in StarCraft 2 is you rob a train. The train hovers. The train is, it's kind of weird. There, mostly I just want to see if I can get a map of this. Yeah, this is a map of the mission. So, base, various enemy bases. The point is that you're supposed to hit all, or all but one of the trains that pass, all of which start here, here, or in one case here, and go like this. Single track, there's nothing else. For some reason the trains start. Now part of it is like the constraint of the genre. I mean that yeah, you should there should be a clear origin point and clear destination so you can hit the route, and then to maybe to make you have to move around, they have several routes that you should be hitting, which is just, it's again, it's kind of a weird thing because usually trains would go from, I mean, if these are cargo trains, it would go from a resource node to a port or something, but that's, but why would they be going on parallel lines like this is the thing. So, again, so bear in mind, like, I mean, not, I mean, if we're making a realism critique of StarCraft 2, this is like complaint number, 300. But, yeah, the Expanse asteroid tubes. Yeah, I'm talking about the asteroid tubes. I don't actually remember if we've ever seen the trains on Earth. We've seen them on Mars. They're depicted, but they're actually, so the aesthetic in the Expanse is not space western. Here it's not even space western. It's imitating Firefly and imitating the train job. So again, within the constraints of the genre. So because this is a strategy game, you're supposed to have to actually defeat other military units. It's not a stealth game, so there are enemy units that will guard the trains that you need to attack. That's not the problem. It's this kind of weird thing that's been replicated by StarCraft 2 co-op. Whenever there are trains, the trains always go, that's where the trains always go. It's, there's like a mission that's literally like this in co-op, and it's the same thing. You, somehow there's never two tracks on a train, which always upsets me because it's people who are literally imitating a specific Wild West aesthetic. And here's the thing: the Wild West didn't really have trains. So let's talk about something that's not SFF, namely the good, the bad, and the ugly. So the good, the bad, and the ugly. I didn't prepare a clip, but there's a train scene there. Now, the good, the bad, and the ugly takes place in the New Mexico campaign of the Civil War. That would be 1862. I don't think there actually were trains in New Mexico in that period. So let's see if you say a U.S. rail map. 1865, I think, or so. So this is 1890, so here we start seeing trains, and I'm sorry about the resolution, but that's what I've seen by Googling. So yeah, the trains cover essentially the entirety of the manufacturing belt, the Northeast and Midwest. Also the more agricultural parts of the Midwest, like Iowa, because the idea was that every farm needed to be within a couple of kilometers of a railhead. The South was much worse covered, as you can see, but still quite a lot of dense coverage. Not in Florida, because Florida was barely populated, especially South Florida. Miami, I think, was only developed in the beginning of the 20th century. Only a handful of lines to the west, though. And this is 1890. So 1865, again, sorry about the resolution, but nothing in the west. So they started building the transcontinental 1863, and I'm pretty sure I can get you exact dates for this. Transcontinental Railway, Railroad, U.S. Timeline. UP used to have a map. So they begin in 1863, and they're not showing me a map, sadly. Oh, right, because they didn't say map. That would be useful. Okay, let's just do first transcontinental and see if we're seeing the map of this. So yeah, built 63 to 69. This was the first railroad in the West. It did not go through New Mexico. So my point is that there's a train scene. I mean, my entire point is that there's a train scene in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly in a state in an era when there were no trains. Because, and this is not space western, this is western. This is... Would it be fair to say that The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is the most acclaimed western film ever? I mean, it's either that or High Noon. I personally think High Noon was severely overrated. Like, High Noon was kind of like the white and black one, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is the exact opposite. So they're not showing the dates in which these were added, but to be clear, this was the only thing in the West in the 1860s. So, but they still have a little scene when one of the characters is taken prisoner and put on a train from which this character then figures out a way to escape. And again, there were no trains in the West in that era. People rode horses. I might even add that the arrival of the railroad was what made the West less wild. So once you have a railroad, suddenly it's less wild. You still have... Okay, so yeah, railroads built by 1870, yeah. Just this line and a branch, the film takes place here. And yeah, I mean, this could be a thing if it were 1890. It's canonically 1860. Like the Civil War is a big thing in the film, which kind of, I guess, collapses. Again, it's a kind of aesthetic that collapses a bunch of things together. So it collapses maybe the company town, not seen in. I don't actually know if westerns depict company towns. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly does not. Space westerns love them as a trope to the point that The Expanse, I think its big world-building error is in portraying the belt as kind of like company towns and not as like the modern North Slope of Alaska, where yeah, it sucks to live there, but have you seen what wages you pull there as an oil rig worker? Or as anything, if you're, I've heard, some doctors told me that in Alaska, if you sign a contract to be a doctor there, maybe not in Anchorage, maybe you need to go to Fairbanks or the North Slope, but if you sign a contract there for a year, to commit to be there for a year, you earn $1 million a year. And yeah, American doctors get paid pretty well, but they don't get paid $1 million a year if they live anywhere that's not that part of Alaska. It's how nuts that is. And so I imagine Australia is the exact same thing. Generally, the way they work is that in capitalist societies, people in very remote and inhospitable areas get paid extra, and not just capitalist societies. And in the Soviet Union, people are familiar with the gulags. People are familiar with people who were building infrastructure in Siberia through coercion. But if you were not a convict, then you would actually get paid extra if you moved to Siberia or to the far north to be in like I don't remember the entire list of cities. I think Norilsk was one of them. Cities that were again even more inhospitable than, let's say, Moskva, Kazan, the European Russian or the European or West Siberian Russian places that are very cold, not very nice to live in, but not the same as living in like Yakutsk. Yeah, exactly. And this is, I think, something that because the Wild West genre uh, looks at, like thinks about company towns, it kind of misses how high the wages were. Remember, California was one of the wealthiest states in the United States from like 1848 onward. And I mean, yeah, there was exploitation in the company towns. There was worse exploitation in the factories, not in the company town. Oh, yeah, that's interesting. Yuppie adjacent is a weird thing because usually nowadays people who get rich through working in the mines for a couple of years, that's unless they're tech workers and they're doing it in San Francisco, they're not yuppies. They're, if anything, culturally anti-yuppie. There's this mentality of I went out and applied myself in the mines and worked and earned $150,000 a year with only a high school diploma. Why does everyone else whine and want government handouts kind of mentality? There's literally an entire book about such a person, which is called The House of the Spirits. Okay, I shouldn't call the entire book about such a person. That's not the main thing of the book, but one of the two narrators, the grandfather, that's specifically his outlook on life. Like he's an aristocrat. I mean, it's Latin America, so it's not exactly entitled, but yeah, he's gentry. His family hacienda was not producing any income, so he went to work in the mines for a couple of years, made it, and then took over the hacienda and actually made it produce, and then became later in his life like conservative to the point of like being enthusiastically pro Pinochet. So it was the relationship between him and his granddaughter, who is not pro Pinochet, is all I'm gonna say. So yeah, and so there is, I think, in more mainstream depictions, it's everything together. So it's the train because it's part of it. Often, if they go anything into how the train is run, which they do on Firefly or on StarCraft, it's going to involve some kind of exploitation, as if the train is not like service for people. It's going to involve things. It's going to involve very powerful outlaws, which again I guess still exist in trains were a thing, but much less so than before. It's going to involve. It's going to involve. If we see company towns, then company town exploitation. We absolutely see this on Firefly and Chaintown. StarCraft 2 doesn't directly depict that, but there's dialogue that makes it clear that it happened in the past, and this is why. And I think the chief engineer, Raynor's chief engineer in StarCraft 2 specifically, reminds him of how he came to work under him because Raynor rescued him in it doesn't say strike, but essentially worker action against exploitative business owners. So it's always that kind of aesthetic, and even there's actually I'm gonna advertise a video game. I am not paid to do this advertising. I just played the demo. It was fun. It's called Rosewater. It is. It's a Western adventure game. And yeah, it's an alternate 19th century, but it's still. I always find it a little weird when she arrives by train in an era when there would not have been trains there. Again, fun game. I mean, the parts of it that I've played, again, I've only played the demo, but I'm just pointing out that it is like a thing in the genre, and you can literally see the video without sound, and how yeah. So it's a depiction where um again it's a I mean I'm not going to say that the train is always viewed as a form of exploitation. We're just I guess it would not have been commuters there, so we don't see how it's used except like travel to the place. And I will say the Expanse does depict the trains um does depict them as like what they are, which is essentially a utility. We're seeing Joe Miller use the. I don't remember if they call it the metro system, but what is functionally the metro system of Ceres. Um, he uses it to get between places. Essentially, Ceres is portrait is this. I'm not going to call it underground city because it's not exactly underground. It's just a. It's never actually made clear whether it's a spinning space station or something. It says it's a spinning asteroid, but the point is that airlock is pointing down, which would not be on. Oh, they call it the tube. Okay, yeah. So yeah, so it is actually useful to get to places. It is viewed as like something that's very much a lived-in. You know, we can actually see if there's a series station tube and see if I can get to it without. Okay, I can't. But you literally just from the thumbnails, you can kind of see the aesthetic that they're going for. They're gonna make they're gonna make season 7. No, no. Okay. Anyway, oh, it's yeah. The spun asteroid is weird because it's an asteroid that mass. If you spin it, just it disintegrates. I'm pretty sure. But um, but whatever. Like I mean, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about specifically the train system again. Like the tube again. It's a way to get between places. Same thing on Mars. There's even a scene. I forget. I don't think it's depicted on the show, but it's depicted in the book where Bobby Draper is on a train and a person and a panhandler claiming to be a homeless vet asks for money, and then the entire and the point of the scene is that the homeless vet claims to have been in a battle that she had fought in, so she calls him on and tells him find a better story. But it's something that would be very recognizable if you're just used to taking trains and to taking the subway in the U.S. Honestly, taking the subway in a European country, there are panhandlers. I think there are more in New York than Berlin. For example, there's certainly are buskers in Paris. I don't remember if there are panhandlers who will just ask you for money without playing music in exchange. People who play music in exchange for money, absolutely a thing in Paris. People do. I don't remember if they how much dancing they do. Whereas in New York, there's like very extensive breakdancing. Everyone who's not used to that is afraid of, and everyone who's used to that thinks it's like good art. So, and I point this because The Expanse, again, it's not a space western, but it does have. Oh yeah, no, Atlanta obviously would have breakdancers. I'm trying to remember if I saw. It would not have been American. It would not have been like American breakdancing in Paris because why the fuck would people do that? But I'm trying to remember. But I'm pretty sure people were doing dance, not just music, on the RR. But yeah, so the issue here, and I highlight The Expanse not because I've seen it, although I have seen it, but because or read it, same, but also because the Expanse has a lot of the space western trappings. Again, it's not a space western except for book/season 4, which we should not speak of. but it has it has the trappings of, let's say, the corrupt central government versus or maybe not corrupt, but like ineffective central government versus people in the sticks mentality, and that is dendritic. So that is something that the Expanse, being much better than Firefly, depicts at like the level of like even people trying to impose like some kind of belt or control of the belt, so have to deal with like the periphery within the belt's periphery, if that makes sense. Whereas a place like Ceres is like more central within the belt, economically speaking. And the and again the oppressed company town aspect, but because they're not going for that aesthetic elsewhere, and they're going for a different aesthetic when they're talking about the space station. It's like, I mean, space station is a very different aesthetic from space western. The interior, the sets of, first of all, the sets of the Expanse don't look like California because it wasn't shown in California, but also don't generally look like Canada either, because they look like the interior of a spaceship or a space station. So again, because the aesthetic is very different, we're suddenly seeing the metro not be portrayed as, again, single track maglev, but as something that looks like it's a subway system that I could be taking. It's just a matter of what aesthetic they were going for, I guess. But the point is that you can still go for the aesthetic while making the trains double track. You can make where you can still make the trains feel like someone would use them, rather and not just to do what? Be a migrant worker on a newly settled planet that you would land on by spaceship is kind of the weird thing. And again, my point is not to dump on Firefly, it's just to think that the aesthetic of trains is really, that's how you know it's the Western, because there are trains and they feel like trains as depicted in Westerns, or trains as people remember from a, let's face it, mythical golden age of rail travel that was early 20th century, not all Western. So anyway, so that's kind of so that's kind of why they're depicting the trains, I guess. And again, it's not exactly coming out of thinking about freight versus passengers. Like something that I am certain someone has done in written SF. Generally, written SF. First of all, there's way more written SF than filmed SF, but also written SF. I think filmed SF is like it's not like they take a random selection of the most successful things. Like for example, the kind of classical Mila stuff. I guess they made a Starship Troopers film, but I can't actually think if they have made a prestige TV series out of anything in that genre. So my point is, what I kind of would like to say, and again, I'm sure multiple SF world builders have done this, and I suspect some of them have published on that, is something where maybe the thing is that the train, like the whole point of the train is that they're cheap. It's like boats, right? I mean, people, to a good approximation, do not ride ships for passenger service. I forget if I've made a video about ferries. If I haven't, yell at me, I might. So there are ferries. People use them, but not in meaningful numbers. So, for example, in the United States, the busiest ferry is called the Staten Island Ferry, which has, I think, 50 or 60,000 users per day. Yearly, okay, this is going to be, so this is 40-something thousand per weekday, but this is a fake number because Corona. So I imagine pre-Corona it would have been somewhat higher, like 60. Again, I think pre-Corona was about 60,000 ish per weekday. and again, by far it's the busiest in North America. Now, I believe number two is Seabus in Vancouver. Yeah, that probably is. I think Vancouver is caught up to pre-corona, so that would be about it. Oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah. So the point I'm making is that ferries are useful in very limited sets of circumstances for passenger travel, namely when both the origin and the destination have a reason to cluster near the sea. This is not something that is very common because ground transportation improved to the point that cities, research, and of course research has no reason to be there, are oriented around land, not sea, to the point that if you see a place that's very sea-oriented, it's probably not had a lot of industrial growth. For example, South County, Rhode Island. Eventually this will load, but you can even see at low resolution that there are all these little towns that are by the sea. And that's on the main transportation arteries are the Boston to New York rail line, the Northeast Corridor, is inland. I-95 is inland. Like if these were important places, I-95 would try to get closer to them. And this is because this area was not, like, didn't industrialize. Like the industrialization of Rhode Island happened through Providence, whereas in 1790, I think Providence and Newport were the same size. Or you can see the same with Long Island. Long Island has all these historic towns that are near the sea, and then it redeveloped entirely separately through the LIRR as suburbs of New York. So it's kind of the oldest parts of Long Island or things like this, and then the mass residents would be here. Like, not exactly transit-oriented development, but things that are within an easy driving distance of a train station. So ferries are used in a pretty special set of circumstances. For example, Lower Manhattan, the towers kept in the water. Staten Island was settled around the ferry, so this is the center of Staten Island. Vancouver has the same thing with waterfront in downtown Vancouver and then in North Van. But again, very uncommon. So there's that, I guess, not a lot of ridership. There are luxury boats, but that's very much a niche. It's pleasure travel. One of the things that shocked me when I learned that a few years ago is that the emissions per passenger, if you ride a boat, if you ride a passenger boat, let's say between the US and Europe, your greenhouse gas emissions are actually higher than if you fly. I mean, yeah, if you hitch a ride on a freight ship, then obviously no. Or if you do what Greta Thunberg did and only ride and you ride a sail ship, then no. But a passenger boat, like a cruise, is less fuel efficient than flying. I think the Titanic, I don't remember this, and I'm not going to check on stream, but I believe that the amount of coal that was needed for the Titanic's complete trip between the United Kingdom and the United States translated to much worse emissions than flying would today. Like, part of it is coal being, I guess it's coal just being inefficient on this. Like, it obviously was not intended as like as a cruise boat unless you're riding in first class, and most passengers are riding third class, with shared bunks and so on. But the point is that boats are not really used as passenger transportation in any meaningful numbers today. But they are very important for freight because they're cheap. They're slow and they're cheap. And if you and now it's not now there's not no they're not cheap for passengers. I imagine you might be able to convert like a container ship into that? I'm not even sure, but I mean, but at anything resembling the levels of comfort that people expect if they're sleeping somewhere for a week, that's just not going to happen. Which is why the cruise ships are expensive and fuel inefficient and so on per passenger, whereas freight boats are actually very fuel efficient. Again, they're slow, but they're fuel efficient. The oil tankers are not consuming significant consumption of their own haulage while they get you from, I don't know, Daman to, I guess, India or China or wherever, or from. Actually, don't know to what extent there's haulage by boat to Europe because oil from Russia comes right pipeline, or came via pipeline. And the US is self-sufficient at this point. So the point is that in the same way that boats are really freight-only form of transportation for all intents and purposes today, there would actually be an interesting thing about portraying trains in a world with flying cars, even just because flying cars. I mean, if you're assuming the flying cars actually follow standard science fiction aesthetic, so it's like owning a car, like it's not going to be like actual attempted flying cars today, which are, for all intents and purposes, helicopters. Helicopters are infamously noisy. I also don't think they have a lot of capacity if they're used at scale, which they can't because they're incredibly expensive. So assuming that it's a science fiction aesthetic where like cars that don't get in traffic because they can move in 3 dimensions and not in 1 dimension, then yeah, they would be much faster and more direct. But maybe that's not how you hold goods, because you do need to keep your mass. The fact that they have very poor safety. But that it's something that I think flying car depictions in SF never get right. I imagine the world with flying cars is one in which trains are still really useful for freight. Because flying cars, I mean, flying is expensive. Lifting things is expensive. And again, SF I don't think has been very good at showing you the cost equation, how brutally expensive it is to ship by spaceship, to the point that owning a spaceship really needs to be like owning a private jet and not like owning a fishing boat. And I don't mean a big fishing boat where you have 20 people working for it. It's portrayed as like you're a fisherman, like a simple fisherman. And the point is that when you were doing that, it would actually be really interesting to show trains as something very different, as something that's freight only. Again, the United States is almost like that. Right? In the United States, mainline rail is used for 2 things. It's used for freight, and it's used for some passenger transportation on the Northeast Corridor, and for commuters around New York, Chicago, Boston, Philadelphia. I guess you can also count Caltrain, but for example, commuter rail ridership in Washington D.C. is laughable. In LA, it's laughable. Most of the places, even places that have a little bit of a subway system, like Atlanta, it's non-existent. So yeah, the United States or in Canada have, for all intents and purposes, a freight-only mainline rail system. Australia, same thing. There is very high ridership commuter rail in Sydney, and the other main cities. I keep saying that I believe Sydney might actually be the number 1 city. No, it can't be number 1 city in the world in model split for commuter trains, because Tokyo and Seoul exist. Zurich might also beat Sydney, I'm not sure. But Sydney certainly beats Sydney clearly beats any European city in commuter rail model split. Except again, maybe possibly City, and even then I'm not sure. Sydney generally has a pretty good model split. It's just that its rail system is entirely commuter rail plus the metro that opened yesterday, and the numbers that I'm telling you about model split predate the metro. I think I saw the numbers from 2016, so before the metro. But again, that's just around Sydney, around Melbourne, and so on. It's like usually you get between cities in Australia by flying. Why are there trains? Because air freight is incredibly expensive. So freight you send by boat or by train. And this is something that would actually I think would be it's something that I think would be interested to explore as a kind of world building exercise in any kind of SF. Again, I'm sure it's been done. Like, I mean, the SFF community involves a ton of very obsessive world builders, people who you can never accuse of suffering from allism. I'm sure people have done this. I mean, it's just something that I think would be nice to depict somewhere. I don't know of any book that's actually done it. If anything, sometimes the far future SF trend is to assume that airships are that. The Diamond Age, I think, where the airships get you the slow but cheap and reliable transportation because they're airships. They are completely untethered from geography, so you don't need to be near a port, you don't need to be anything, you can be wherever you want, and that leading to changes in world geography to at least some extent. I say to at least some extent because somehow it is something that's for all intents and purposes the Shanghai International Settlement. So that would be kind of an interesting depiction. Just, again, I haven't seen it. Usually it's something that goes to an aesthetic like Wild West or like something that I think is another aesthetic, but I think it's a much more useful aesthetic. It's the aesthetic of used. Let's call it used future without being Western. So that would be a city that's kind of gritty. The city that's kind of gritty, and again, that's how the Expanse portrays things. Even Mars, which kind of plays itself as like this place where everyone has a job and doesn't have social problems. They have social problems. Because I guess when you do that, your aesthetic is you don't think about the Wild West. You think about probably you're thinking about the history of New York City, maybe, or the cultural depictions of New York City. I don't think the writers of The Expanse are from the New York area. Maybe Chicago or something. Same thing. So because depictions of American urban grit, and I say American, but The Expanse was by American, pretty much all big time SFF was written by Americans. The main exceptions that I can think of, okay, or by Brits, the main exceptions I can think of, things that are not originally English, are of course the Oeuvre of Liu Cixin, like Three Body, and Plant of the Apes. Can't think of other examples. Night Watch. Night Watch is Russian. And also is, I mean, I heard of it through like an American community, but it's not very well known there. The portrayal. So the point is that the portrayal of gritty city would be informed by American cities that do have subways. And so because of that, it's maybe more anchored. It's something that is more like what people actually ride these subways today experience, with the obvious understanding that it's less gritty now than it was in the 70s, but that's fine. I mean, the 1970s New York grit is recognizable today. Is the city like that? No. Crime rate in New York is much lower than it used to be, but New Yorkers would be able to recognize that depiction, or people who have been through New York, or people who have seen New York will be able to recognize that description, and that depiction. The same is true of people who have been to a lot of other cities. Again, grit is not an exclusively American thing. It's just, again, we're talking about culture that's mostly American or occasionally British. Um, uh, so yeah, that's my extended rant about how things are portrayed, how trains are portrayed in SFF. Again, not just because Westerns have that aesthetic. Um, if you do have questions about this, I will take them. If people want to tell me about things that portray, I mean, maybe again, again, knowing something about the SFF community, I'm pretty sure that what I outlined to you has been done before. I do not know if it's, I don't know if it's been done in something that's very well known. I mean, obviously, I have not read it, but there's lots of SFF that I have not read. Um, what's the? Oh God, you have. I don't know. I used to have like 10 seconds uh, of lag, and now I'm saying 47 seconds of lag, and it's always. Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, I can see that. Just because, yeah, because then I imagine maglev is going to be cheaper. Um, but I don't know. I mean, a lot of it is just physical construction costs. Like, I mean, I don't think you can ever make maglev cheaper than a normal train. You can make it about as costly as a normal train. Um, I actually can't think of of an example where SF portrays big infrastructure mega projects positively. It's always maybe they used to be built, maybe they were built once and now they're kind of screwy, uh, or the project is running into trouble. There's, for example, in Star Wars, in Return of the Jedi, when they talk about how they're uh, doubling their effort to run the construction of the new Death Star. I mean, I've read an article that was talking about project management entirely through that scene, like, and it's obviously bad project management. And it's, like I guess maybe because the idea is that big infrastructure is something that the Empire does, and you can't portray the Empire positively because why? Like, I mean, not because I mean, not even because of any kind of anti-government ideology, just because if the authority figure is reasonable, where's the conflict? Um, which is kind of weird now that I think about it even more, because Trek, for example, portrays symmetric conflict, and so does Babylon 5. So in symmetric conflict, I mean, yeah, you have the Empire. There are several of them. One of them is the point. I mean, maybe is the point of view. Society, yeah, of course, is going to do big things. Um, uh, but like something like, I mean, where do we see something like Grand Paris Express? Yeah. So I don't. I mean, I actually don't think it comes from the left. Certainly not Milasef. Milasef is the exact opposite. Milasef is traditional Cold War conservatism, to the point that in a lot of these series, you will have characters suddenly turn to the camera and rant about something conservative. Like they will make a rant about how awful it is that people who didn't serve in the military can vote, or how in a proper society welfare is illegal, or like that kind of animus. Like Milasef, it's not new right. Milasef is kind of militaristic bridge between old and new right, if that makes sense. Like, it's very clear in the politics of Heinlein. And Asimov and Clarke, for example, were not at all new left in any way, shape, or form. Quite to the contrary. So it's not because it's anti-big. Come to think about it, I'm trying to remember how the trains are portrayed in the Robot series in the case of Steel. My recollection is that they're essentially portrayed as a kind of weird Futurama version of the New York City subway, but I read that book 19 years ago, and I have very little inclination to go back to it. Yeah, I mean, so I should probably say Western SF. Knowing that I'm only talking about things that are very common in the West, and I'm very consciously not at all talking about anime and manga, this is for two reasons. The first is that my knowledge of anime and manga is very limited, and I'm not going. So I don't want to talk about this because I know many people who read me, watch me, and so on, are the kind of nerds who have forgotten more anime than I've ever seen in my life. And the second thing is that Japanese society is much more used to trains, to the point that I imagine that the way trains would be portrayed in anime would be different, just because my understanding that anime basically always, if it doesn't take place in the sticks, it takes place in Tokyo. Like, it's never even, as far as I remember, it's not even going to be anchored to any place that's not Tokyo. It's not going to say, okay, I'm telling a local story about my hometown. My hometown is, let's say, Aomori or Sapporo or Fukushima. And so it's always like somewhere in Tokyo or something that's literally a village, at least as far as I've seen. And so I don't actually. So again, the very little anime I've seen does not depict the Tokyo subway system, but I'm sure that if there were such depictions, they would be more recognizable, because again, that is like telling a story in New York. The depictions of the subway the depictions of the New York City subway are often inaccurate, but the inaccuracy is much more like continuity errors, like not knowing where neighborhoods are relative to each other. This being a little after Christmas, we can talk about Home Alone 2, where the toy store, Duncan's Toy Chest, which is very clearly based on F.A.O. Schwartz, which is, I believe, or maybe they've closed. I think they were on 59th Street, and then it's portrayed as walking distance or running distance to 95th Street on the Upper West Side. So you have a little bit of that kind of continuity error, but you don't have a single track subway train. Yeah, again, I don't know. I mean, I've been there, but I was there in 2001. I don't remember if I've been there since. Ooh, oh, okay, that's okay. Huh. Again, I'm not going to talk about, as I said, I'm not talking about anime and manga because I can literally tell you the entire set of anime series that I've seen, which is 3000 Leagues in Search of Mother, which, if you're an American anime fan, you have never heard of. If you're Israeli, you have heard of it, but not by that name. You will know it by the name The Heart. So this was very popular in 1990s Israel. They even mentioned that. Because the original novel was very popular in 50s Israel, so the series that was adapted from like 2 pages of it was also very popular. So I've seen that, and I've seen Utena. And Totoro, and My Neighbor Totoro. So yeah, the point is that I don't want to talk about anime and manga because I know enough to know that I know basically nothing. And again, because it's a culture where trains have a very different place in the culture from in the US / Canada / Australia / the UK viewing like American history or something, then I would not put it in the same bucket. As when we're talking about depictions in very Western media. Western, not in the Western genre. Western is in the Western world. Western is in Western in the sense that Berlin is Western, not in the sense that Denver is Western, if that makes sense. I say Berlin, I'm not talking about any German media about this. But yeah, so are there other questions about this? Where was I? Also, Schwartz reality. the Fifth Avenue location. Where was it? 745 Fifth Avenue? Okay. Okay, now I'm gonna check this because I don't remember. I don't remember the magic number on Fifth Avenue. Yeah. Yeah, as I said, okay, I thought it was 59th, but it's between 57th and 58th. Apologies. Yeah, so are there more questions? Oh, you have one. Did you view Zootopia? No. I have not seen Zootopia. Oh, interesting that... Huh. Especially interesting that the train looks like a metro. Like the doors, like the door placement here is like this is how a metro train looks. Maybe a high-speed train, but like the mid-car door is something that you would expect. Like the articulation screams this is a maybe a commuter train. Certainly not anything old-timey. Okay, it's just strange. The middle of the car and then the end of the car. Like this car feels like it's high-speed rail. This car feels like it's some kind of metro, like maybe a regional metro, because a proper urban metro should have more doors. Either way, not something that you have for a single track. Which again, I just think it's kind of weird that they're doing it single track on that, because at least from those few pics, it doesn't look like a Western aesthetic. It looks like a normal urban train aesthetic where you would double trunk. Are there other questions? No memory called Empire? The answer is no, for many reasons. The first one is that this is the first I heard of this. Again, like I don't have, like I haven't read all the stuff. Okay. Like I think I've heard positive things about Arkady Martin, but I don't know anything about that book. And separately, a lot of the single track aesthetic is something that is much more pictorial than written. Like a specific aesthetic, like how I was making inferences from how the doors were on the train in the Zootopia text. The Zootopia thing. Are there other questions? If not, we can wind down. Can we do family lecture? What's family lecture? Okay, it's not, okay. Wait, what? Okay, I should say that I watched the Pokemon anime through the Charizard Chills episode, so the entire first arc and a bit of the second, of the beginning of the second arc. I don't remember trains there, but also I watched it when I was like 12. Oh, family ticketing best practice. Not now. Maybe another video. Sorry. All right. Ciao. Thank you. Oh, thank you. I don't know if I'm doing this. We're doing this in 3 days or in a week. I probably want to say something about trains in Israel next time. But then family ticketing, yeah, that's definitely a thing. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Ciao, ciao.